Never in my life had I imagined that as the CEO of a publicly traded company, someone would look me in the eye and call me a freeloader. Worse, the car they had just driven off in was mine. I stood on the damp Lviv curb, the crisp morning air doing nothing to cool the burn in my chest as I watched the sleek taillights of my own black Maybach disappear around the corner. My driver, Alfred, had just climbed behind the wheel, panicked and desperate, leaving me stranded. All to appease his girlfriend, Kara, who was currently sitting in my passenger seat, convinced she was the queen of the castle. I calmly pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "Hello," I said, my voice deadpan, masking the absolute fury vibrating through my veins. "A man and a woman just took my car without permission. I'd like to report a theft." 20 minutes later, a squad car pulled up, its flashing lights painting the cobblestone street in streaks of red and blue. But before the two officers could even step out, the unmistakable roar of a twin-turbo V12 engine echoed down the avenue. Alfred came tearing around the corner, slamming on the brakes so hard the Maybach lurched to a violent stop just feet from where we stood. He jumped out, his face chalk-white, the cockiness from 20 minutes ago entirely erased. "Miss Pruitt, what happened? Why did you call the police?" Alfred stammered, his hands shaking as he gestured frantically at the car. No, officers, this is all a misunderstanding. I'm Miss Pruitt's driver. I just dropped someone off on the way. Nobody stole anything. See, I brought it right back." I looked at him, my expression a wall of stone. "Miss Pruitt, do you want to press charges?" the lead officer asked, turning his gaze to me. Before I could answer, Alfred leaned in close, his voice dropping to a desperate, ragged whisper. "Miss Pruitt, please. For my father's sake. He drove for you all those years. You know his lungs aren't good. I finally found a girlfriend, and keeping her happy is the only thing he wanted for me. I had no choice." The mention of Owen Lawrence hit me like a physical blow. Owen had been my chauffeur for 6 years, honest, dependable, and fiercely loyal. When his lung condition forced him to resign 3 months ago, his final embarrassed request was for me to give his struggling son a chance. I had done it out of respect for a good man. I closed my eyes, letting out a heavy, slow breath. "Forget it. I'm dropping the charges." Alfred looked like he might faint from relief, thanking me 1,000 times over. I didn't say another word. I got into the back seat, letting him drive me to the office in silence. For the next few weeks, Alfred was a ghost of perfection. The passenger seat remained empty. Every trace of Kara, and the nasty freeloader note she had left on my seat, was scrubbed away. But then a new pattern started. He began showing up late. First it was a traffic accident, then a burst pipe, then an alarm that didn't go off. The excuses were flimsy, but because I was managing projects worth hundreds of millions, I let it slide. I simply didn't have the energy for petty drama. Until this weekend that on a whim, I decided to escape to my suburban villa at Peach Blossom for a quiet getaway. I called Alfred to pick me up, but he hemmed and hawed, his voice tight with anxiety. "Miss Pruitt, I woke up to a flat tire. The mechanic says the car won't be ready until tomorrow. I can call a cab for you." "Forget it, I'll grab one myself," I replied, hanging up. It was a beautiful afternoon when my taxi pulled up to the gates of my villa. But the moment I stepped out, my blood turned to ice. There, parked squarely in my private driveway, completely intact and gleaming under the sunlight, was my black Maybach. A terrible, heavy silence seemed to drop over the property. I quickened my pace toward the front door, noticing it was already unlocked, slightly ajar. Pushed it open. The sight inside stole the air right out of my lungs. My pristine, custom-designed living room was entirely destroyed. The Italian leather sofa and imported carpets, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, were covered in dirty footprints, empty alcohol bottles, and scattered sunflower seed shells. Worst of all, jagged black cigarette burns were charred straight through the luxury fabric of the cushions. And there, sitting right in the center of the wreckage, surrounded by a laughing crowd of her friends, was Kara. "Kara, you are so lucky," one of her friends gushed, snapping a photo. "Not just rich, but so good to you. When you become a trophy wife in a place like this, don't forget about us little people, okay?" Kara's lips curled into a smug, arrogant grin. But as her eyes drifted toward the foyer, her smile vanished. She spotted me standing in the doorway. Her heels clicked sharply against the ruined floorboards as she marched straight toward me, Her chin lifted in pure arrogance. Crack. Before a single syllable could leave my mouth, Kara's hand flew out, slapping me hard across the face. The force of the blow rattled my jaw, leaving my cheek burning in a sudden sharp wave of heat. "You shameless tramp," Kara hissed, her face twisting with venomous disgust as her friends gasped behind her. "You actually followed my boyfriend here?" I stood rooted to the spot, the sharp sting on my cheek a violent contrast to the icy calm settling over my mind. The living room had gone dead silent, save for the low hum of the air conditioner and the shallow, nervous breathing of Kara's entourage. "Kara, what's going on?" one of her friends asked, her phone halfway raised as if unsure whether to record or run. Kara jabbed a manicured finger at my face, her eyes flashing with a sickening mix of triumph and malice. "This is the freeloader I was telling you about. Mooching rides off my boyfriend wasn't enough. Now she's shown up to mooch off his house." I looked around the wrecked room, then met her gaze dead on. "Who told you this is Alfred's house?" Kara let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. "He did. Told me himself. You pathetic little gold digger, you found out my boyfriend is the CEO of the company, so now you're pulling every cheap trick in the book to get close to him. Bumming rides every day, manufacturing excuses to be alone with him. And now you crawl to his private villa to throw yourself at him." She turned to her friends, her voice pitching higher, desperate for an audience. "You want to know how shameless this trash really is? She parked herself in his car every single day. I left a note telling her to stop, and she threw a fit and called the cops, claiming he was harassing an employee. So my boyfriend had to start dropping me off at the office first, then double back just to chauffeur her around, all to protect the company's reputation." The puzzle pieces snapped together with a sickening click. That was why Alfred had been late every single morning. He was running a secret secondary shuttle service for his girlfriend using my gas, my time, and my Maybach, all while painting me as a desperate stalker to cover his tracks. "Well played, Alfred," I thought, a dangerous smile threatening to touch my lips. "But you forgot who owns the board." Without a word, I pulled out my phone and dialed the Grandview Group's legal department. "Get a team to my villa at Peach Blossom right now." Before I could finish the sentence, Kara lunged forward, snatching the phone out of my hand and hurling it violently against the hardwood floor. The screen shattered into a web of dead pixels. But she wasn't done. Her gaze dropped to my chest, and her eyes lit up with a vicious greed. "That jade pendant doesn't look cheap. Let me guess, you spread your legs for some sugar daddy to buy it." Before I could register the movement, her hand clamped around the thin gold chain and ripped it off my neck. The metal bit into my skin, leaving a thin trail of heat. Panic, pure, raw, and suffocating, flooded my chest. "Give it back," I whispered, my voice suddenly cracking. "This necklace must be worth a fortune," she taunted, dangling the heavy green stone just out of my reach. "It's worthless," I lied, lunging forward blindly, my hands trembling. "But it means everything to me. Give it back right now." That pendant was the last piece of my mother I had left. When I was 4 years old, dying in a hospital bed, my mother had walked up a mountain in 100-degree heat, prostrating herself at every single step until her knees were raw flesh and bone, just to pray for my survival. She was granted that jade charm, and against all medical logic, I woke up. My mother never recovered from the toll it took on her body. On her deathbed, she had placed it in my palm. I had carried it every single day for 33 years. "Oh, is it special to you?" Kara sneered, a twisted grin spreading across her face. "Too bad." With a flick of her wrist, she slammed the jade pendant onto the floor with all her strength. A sharp, agonizing crack split the air. The jade shattered into a dozen jagged fragments, scattering across the dirty carpet like broken glass. My mother's legacy destroyed in a fraction of a second. Something inside my soul snapped clean in half. The grief was a physical weight, crushing my lungs, before it erupted into blinding white-hot rage. "You bitch!" I screamed, throwing my weight forward and swinging my hand. My palm connected with Kara's cheek with a resounding slap that sent her stumbling back into the coffee table. Kara shrieked, clutching her face, her eyes turning wild and feral. "Beat the slut within an inch of her life. Whoever does the best job gets $1 million. The promise of money hit her friends like a starting pistol. In an instant, the crowd descended on me in a frenzy of fists, heavy bags, and sharp heels. A hard kick to my ribs sent me crashing to the floor, my hands instinctively shielding my head as the blows kept raining down. You actually hit Kara? She's about to become the wife of Grandview Group's CEO. Who the hell do you think you are? One of them yelled, pinning my arms down. I gritted my teeth against the blinding pain in my side, coughing as dust and ash kicked up around me. You're going to regret this, I choked out, tasting iron. Every single one of you. The room erupted into mocking laughter, a chorus of elitist jeers as they looked down at me on the floor. Kara walked over, grabbing a tight fistful of my hair and yanking my head back until my spine arched painfully. Regret, she whispered, her breath hot and smelling of cheap liquor. I've never regretted a single thing in my life. Go ahead, show me what a worthless piece of trash like you can actually do to make me regret. The words had barely left her mouth when a low, deep vibration began to rattle the window panes. It started as a faint rumble, building rapidly into a deafening roar of high-performance engines tearing up the private driveway. One luxury vehicle after another came screeching to a halt outside the villa, their high beams cutting through the afternoon glare and flooding the ruined living room with blinding white light. Kara's grip on my hair loosened. The laughter died instantly. The heavy, custom oak front doors were suddenly thrown open, and the silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a building. Marcus, my towering head of security, stepped through the threshold first, his 6'2" frame instantly dominating the space. Behind him flowed a relentless wave of dark suits. My primary legal team, 2 senior vice presidents from Grandview Group, and 4 uniformed security guards who immediately fanned out to block every exit. Marcus took in the scene in a single icy sweep. He saw the ashes, the burns, the shattered glass, and the blood on my chin. His face didn't change, but the air in the room dropped 10 degrees. He crossed the room in 4 measured lethal steps, dropping to one knee right beside me and extending a massive steady hand. Madam CEO, Marcus said, his deep voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. Are you able to stand? The silence in the room was absolute, heavy enough to suffocate. I watched the exact fraction of a second when the story Kara had been living in for months shattered along every single seam. Her fingers slipped from my hair as if she had just touched scorching iron. I took Marcus's hand and forced myself to stand. Every muscle in my torso protested, a dull throb of agony pulsing from my bruised ribs, but I kept my shoulders back. Straight spine. I wiped a thin smear of blood from my chin with the back of my hand and looked at the crowd. They were frozen, trapped in various postures of unfinished violence like wax figures in a burning museum. Document everything, I said to the legal team, my voice steady, stripped of any emotion. Every room, every surface. I want high-resolution photographs of every single damage point before a single item is touched. The attorneys moved instantly, cameras clicking, the cold flash of their lenses cutting through the room. One of Kara's friends made a tiny, choked noise in the back of her throat, the sound of someone stepping into an empty elevator shaft in the dark. Who? Kara started, her voice shaking, the sharp, toxic confidence entirely drained from her face. Who is she? Nobody answered her. Nobody needed to. Just then the heavy front door creaked open again. Alfred walked into the living room, carrying a small brown paper bag. The sweet, earthy scent of roasted sweet potatoes reached us before he even took 3 steps. He still had the proud, eager expression of a man performing a grand romantic gesture for his demanding girlfriend. Then he looked up. He saw Marcus. He saw the dark suits photographing the cigarette burns on the carpet. He saw me. The paper bag slipped from his fingers. The roasted sweet potatoes rolled across the ruined hardwood, gathering cigarette ash and jagged shards of broken glass. Miss Pruitt, Alfred whispered, his face turning a translucent shade of gray. I can explain. I can. Alfred. I interrupted, my voice very quiet, very final. Tell everyone in this room exactly who owns this villa. He stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. He said nothing. Kara lunged toward him, grabbing his arm with the desperate, clawing urgency of a drowning person. Tell them, Alfred. Tell them this is your house. Tell them you're the CEO of Grandview Group. Alfred looked at Kara's frantic face, then at Marcus's massive, unreadable expression, and finally at me. The silence stretched until it was almost painful. Kara's friend, the one who had been live streaming the entire confrontation, slowly, quietly lowered her phone. Alfred closed his eyes and swallowed hard. "It's her house," he whispered to the floor. The words hit Kara like a physical blow. "What?" "The villa is hers," Alfred repeated, his voice completely flat, stripped of all his manufactured pride. "The Maybach is hers. Grandview Group. I'm just her driver. That's all I am. I'm her driver." Kara turned back to me, and I watched her mind frantically try to reassemble the past 6 months. The woman she had called a freeloader. The woman she had sprayed with disinfectant. The woman she had laid disposable seat covers out for. The woman she had ordered her friends to beat within an inch of her life. "You're..." Kara stammered, stepping back. "I am the CEO of Grandview Group," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "This villa is mine. The car Alfred uses to drive you around is mine. You have been an uninvited squatter in my home for how long, Alfred?" Alfred wouldn't look at either of us. 6 weeks, he mumbled to his shoes. 6 weeks. I looked at the ruined Italian leather, the dirty footprints, and then down at the small evidence bag Marcus was already using to carefully collect the shattered pieces of my mother's jade pendant. 6 weeks of deceit, 6 weeks of total disrespect, ending in the destruction of the one irreplaceable thing I owned. Suddenly, the room shifted into panic. Kara's friends began the slow, subtle dance of calculated retreat. One girl took 3 quiet steps toward the wall. Another slipped her phone into her pocket. "We didn't know either," one of them squeaked, turning on Kara with sharp venom. "We all thought Alfred was the billionaire. You told us it was his house. We were just hanging out," another chimed in, looking at Marcus with wide, terrified eyes. "I didn't break anything. I was just here." "You told them to beat me within an inch of my life," I said, my voice dropping an octave, entirely factual. "You held me down by my hair. You participated." Dead silence fell over the room again. "My team has been recording since the moment we crossed the threshold," Marcus announced to the room, his hand resting near his jacket. I looked at the girl who had been filming the entire ordeal earlier. "Whatever you uploaded to social media today, thank you for preserving the evidence. My legal team will be using it to ensure none of you walk away from this." She made that choked elevator shaft sound again. Outside, the distant, wailing scream of police sirens began to echo through the hills of peach blossom, growing louder and closer by the second. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers danced across the high vaulted ceilings of my ruined villa. Within minutes, the living room was swarming with officers, their heavy boots stepping over the spilled sweet potatoes and shattered fragments of my mother's past. Kara was already in motion. The moment the lead officer crossed the threshold, she transformed. The vicious, arrogant girl who had just held me by my hair vanished, replaced instantly by a trembling, wide-eyed victim. She rushed toward them, her voice hitching with perfectly manufactured tears. "Officer, thank God you're here. This is all a massive misunderstanding," Kara sobbed, pointing a shaking hand at me. "I was invited to this property by my boyfriend, and then she burst in and violently attacked me. Look at my face. I was just defending myself." The lead officer didn't look impressed. He held up a firm, steady hand, his face a mask of absolute neutrality. "Please step back, ma'am. We will take statements from everyone individually." I stood completely still, leaning slightly against Marcus's strong frame as a wave of dizziness washed over me. My ribs throbbed with every breath, and my sprained wrist was starting to swell, turning an angry mottled purple. But I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I simply nodded to Christine, my head of legal, who had just stepped up beside the officer. Christine had represented Grandview Group for nearly a decade. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply handed the lead officer a sleek leather-bound folder containing a perfectly summarized legal sheet. "This is Miss Elise Pruitt," Christine said, her tone ice-cold, professional, and completely devastating. "She is the sole CEO of Grandview Group and the registered owner of this property. She arrived today to find her private villa occupied without authorization, her high-value personal assets destroyed, and herself physically assaulted by the individuals in this room." Christine gestured slightly to the security guards, who were already securing the digital backups. "We have comprehensive villa security footage, dashcam footage from the company Maybach these individuals arrived in, and live social media broadcasts recorded and uploaded by the perpetrators themselves over a period of 6 weeks. The individual who granted them access is Alfred Lawrence, a company driver who criminally misrepresented himself as our CEO. The officer looked at the folder, then at the charred furniture, and finally at Kara's friends, who had collectively shrunk back against the wall, trying to become invisible. "We're going to need everyone's identification," the officer announced. The room erupted into quiet panic as ID cards were pulled out. Realizing her story was dissolving in real time, Kara turned on Alfred, her face twisting into something ugly and feral. "You lied to me. You told me you owned this place. You're a pathetic loser." Alfred didn't answer her. He looked hollow, completely drained of color, staring at the floorboards as an officer began reading him his rights. The air inside the villa felt thick with the smell of stale smoke and cheap perfume, so I quietly stepped outside onto the stone terrace, desperate for air that didn't feel toxic. The evening breeze was cool, rustling the pines of peach blossom, but it couldn't stop the shivering deep in my bones. A few minutes later, the gravel crunched behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew his stride. "Miss Pruitt," Alfred whispered, his voice trembling in that same desperate, pleading register he had used in the parking lot weeks ago. "Please, my father. He's so sick. If he finds out I was arrested, if this goes public, the shock will kill him. I'm begging you. Just fire me, let me go, don't press charges. For Owen's sake." I slowly turned to look at him. The boy who had stood in my office, riding on the coattails of a good man's legacy, was completely gone. Only a coward remained. "No," I said. The word was small, quiet, and absolutely unyielding. Alfred blinked, tears spilling over his pale cheeks. "Miss Pruitt, please. You gave me a second chance before. My dad spent 6 years. Your father," I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut glass, "spent 6 years building a reputation for absolute honesty. He turned that reputation into a shield to protect you when you made your first mistake, and I honored that shield. I gave you a second chance because of Owen. Not because of you. Because of him." I stepped closer, ignoring the sharp spike of pain in my ribs. "Your father's loyalty earned you one reprieve, Alfred. Cannot buy you two. You stood in front of me begging for his sake, and the moment my back was turned, you went right back to lying to Kara. You kept stealing my car. You brought her here for 6 more weeks to destroy my home." My gaze drifted down to the small plastic evidence bag resting in Marcus's hand as he stepped onto the terrace. Inside, the jagged green shards of my mother's jade pendant caught the harsh light of the police cruisers. The unhealing ache in my chest flared up, hot and suffocating. "You let her destroy the last thing I had of my mother," I whispered, my voice thick with a grief I could no longer contain. "And you think a brown bag of sweet potatoes makes it right?" Alfred fell to his knees on the gravel, his face buried in his hands, but I didn't feel a single shred of pity. "The consequences are yours to carry, Alfred," I said, turning away from him. "Not your father's." By midnight, the villa was locked down, and I was sitting in a sterile white hospital room. The doctor was thorough, wrapping my sprained wrist and documenting the heavy purple bruising spreading along my jaw and my ribs. Christine stood by the window, already typing out the initial injunctions on her laptop. I sat under the harsh fluorescent lights, clutching the small plastic bag of broken jade in my uninjured hand. 33 years of keeping it safe, gone in a 3-minute tantrum from a girl who thought she could buy the world. I stared at the fragments until my vision blurred, the gold light of the hospital shifting into gray dawn. Then I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, my family's private jeweler. "I have fragments," I told him when he answered, my voice steadying. "Rare jade. They can't be restored to what they were. What can you do with them?" We spoke for 20 minutes, mapping out a plan to seal the pieces inside a custom glass medallion, suspended in clarity, so I could wear her weight against my chest forever. A different form but the same soul. The next morning, the door to my hospital room slowly clicked open. I expected Marcus, or perhaps Christine with the arrest reports. But when I looked up, my heart dropped. Standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on a wooden cane, was Owen Lawrence. He looked so much thinner than he had 3 months ago, his chest rattling with a faint, shallow wheeze as he struggled into the room. But his face. His face was completely broken by pure, unadulterated shame. He let go of his cane, letting it clatter against the wall, and pressed his rough, calloused hands together in front of his chest, bowing his head. "Miss Pruitt," the old man choked out, his voice cracking with emotion. "Miss Pruitt, I heard everything." "Owen," I said, my voice softening instantly as I gestured toward the vinyl armchair near the bed. "Please sit down. You shouldn't be standing." "I can stand for this, Miss Pruitt," he whispered, though his fragile body betrayed him. He sank into the chair with a heavy, ragged sigh, his rough hands trembling as he pressed them tightly together. He looked straight at me, refusing to shield himself from the disgrace. "Alfred's former manager called me. He told me what happened at the villa. Then my son called me from the precinct." He shook his head, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I drove for you for 6 years, Miss Pruitt. In all that time you were never anything but decent to me. And I asked you to take my boy in. I asked you for an opportunity." "You asked me for a chance, Owen," I replied quietly, my sprained wrist resting in a crisp white sling against my chest. "He's the one who decided what to do with it." "I'm not here to excuse him," Owen said, his voice straining under the crushing weight of a father's broken pride. "I know what he did. I'm here because I wanted you to know from me directly. What he did is an absolute disgrace. And what that girl did to your mother's necklace." His voice broke, a sharp, choked sob escaping his throat before he forced himself to collect it. "It's something I can't fix. I know that." The heavy silence of the hospital room gathered around us, broken only by the steady, rhythmic hum of the monitors down the hall. "Owen," I said, leaning forward slightly despite the sharp ache in my bruised ribs, "you spent 6 years being reliable, honest, and steady. You never once took advantage of the trust one extended to you. I know the exact difference between who you are and what Alfred chose to do. I will never hold you responsible for his choices." Owen looked up at me, a flicker of profound gratitude washing over his weathered face. "But I will not protect him from the consequences," I added, my tone turning to cold, unyielding iron. "You understand that, don't you?" "Yes," Owen said, his voice barely a whisper, yet entirely certain. Quietly. Simply. "I understand that, Miss Pruitt." We sat a little longer, the tension in the room slowly draining into a somber, mutual understanding. He told me his lung treatments were progressing slowly but steadily, and I explained the jeweler's plan to seal the jade fragments into a clear glass medallion so I could still carry my mother with me. He listened with the deep, quiet respect of a man who understood exactly why a legacy mattered. When he finally rose to leave, gripping his cane, he paused at the door, looking back at me one last time. "She would have been proud of you," he said softly. "Your mother. I think you should know that." He left before I could find the words to answer, the soft click of the door latch echoing in the quiet room. I looked down at the plastic evidence bag on the bedside table. "Yeah," I thought, a bittersweet warmth spreading through my chest. "I think she would be too." Exactly 48 hours later, Grandview Group's communications team unleashed the official corporate statement. Christine had drafted it with lethal precision, and I had personally approved every single word. It was factual, specific, and backed by a mountain of digital evidence. The statement didn't pull punches. It laid out the entire 6-week unauthorized occupation of my villa, the extensive property damage, the illegal use of the corporate Maybach, and the brutal physical assault I had endured. It explicitly named Alfred Lawrence as the driver who had criminally misrepresented himself as the CEO, and confirmed his immediate termination. But the real killing blow was the photos I explicitly commanded them to include. Along with the images of the charred leather sofa and the trashed living room, there was a stark, high-resolution photograph of the jade fragments inside the police evidence bag. I didn't release it for sympathy. I released it as a public, irrefutable documentation of the sentimental and material destruction they had caused. By noon, the story hit the front pages of 3 major national news networks. By evening, it was a raging viral firestorm across social media. The internet did what it does best. It hunted. Users frantically dug up Kara's old social media accounts, ruthlessly juxtaposing her arrogant, high-life captions against the grim reality of the corporate statement. "Living my best life in our weekend house," she had written 6 weeks ago, posing on my custom furniture. "When Bay has taste," read another caption of her smirking inside my Maybach. The backlash was immediate and catastrophic. By Tuesday morning, Kara's employer, a mid-level fashion brand where she worked in marketing, released a brief, panic statement announcing she had been terminated. Then the rats began to flee the sinking ship. Kara's friends rushed online to post frantic, tearful public apologies, desperately trying to distance themselves from the violence. "I was just there," one wrote. "I didn't break anything. Kara told us she owned the place. None of it mattered." Christine filed civil and criminal charges against every single person present in that room, using the villa's security footage to pinpoint exactly who had kicked me, who had held me down, and who had cheered. Driven to absolute desperation, Kara posted a video. It was a grueling 7 minutes of her sitting in her apartment, her face stripped of makeup, sobbing hysterically into the camera. It was a textbook, highly rehearsed influencer apology. She claimed she was a victim of Alfred's elaborate lies, that she had no reason to doubt him, and that the media was wildly misrepresenting the situation. Crucially, she omitted any mention of the jade pendant, or the fact that she had offered $1 million to her friends to beat me within an inch of my life. I watched the video on my tablet from my high-rise office downtown, my expression entirely blank. Just as the video ended, a sharp knock rattled my office door. Marcus stepped inside, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. His jaw was tight. "Miss Pruitt," Marcus said, his voice dropping into a low, cautious register. "We have a problem at the front entrance. Kara Fox just bypassed the lobby security check under a false name. She's in the private elevator right now, heading straight to this floor." I didn't blink. I didn't tell Marcus to call the police. I simply adjusted the sleek glass medallion resting against my chest, the heavy, shattered fragments of my mother's jade now beautifully encased in crystal clarity. "Let her come up, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet office like ice. "And make sure the security cameras are streaming directly to Christine's laptop." A minute later, the private elevator doors chimed and slid open. Kara stumbled into my office, looking like a ghost of the girl from Peach Blossom. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a wrinkled jacket. Her eyes were bloodshot, surrounded by dark circles, and her hands shook violently as she clutched a designer handbag. The moment she saw me sitting behind my massive mahogany desk, she dropped to her knees, her heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood. "Miss Pruitt, please," Kara cried, sliding across the floor until she was gripping the edge of my desk. "You have to stop this. The lawsuits, the news. My life is completely over. I was fired, my landlord is evicting me, and people are throwing bricks through my apartment window." I looked down at her, my expression an unreadable wall of stone. "You seemed very brave when you were holding me down by my hair, Kara." "I didn't know," she screamed, her voice cracking in pure, raw desperation. "Alfred told me he was the billionaire. He told me you were just a miserable, clingy employee who wouldn't stop begging him for rides. I thought I was protecting my boyfriend from a stalker. I'm a victim of his lies just as much as you are." "A victim?" I leaned forward, the glass medallion catching the morning light. "Alfred lied about his bank account, Kara. He didn't force you to spray me with disinfectant. He didn't force you to command your friends to beat me within an inch of my life. And he certainly didn't force you to rip my mother's pendant from my neck and smash it on the floor." "I'll pay for it," she sobbed, pulling a wad of crumpled cash from her purse and slamming it onto the desk. "Here. Take it. Just drop the criminal assault charges. I can't go to prison, Miss Pruitt. I won't survive." I glanced at the money, then looked back at her pathetic, tear-stained face. "That jade pendant was earned through my mother's blood and devotion when I was dying as a child," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, steady whisper. "There isn't enough currency on this earth to buy back what you broke. You wanted to know what a worthless piece of trash like me could do to make you regret? You're looking at it." Marcus stepped forward, his shadow engulfing her. "The authorities are waiting downstairs, Miss Fox. You bypassed security under a fraudulent identity, which has already been added to your file." Kara's eyes went wide as Marcus firmly gripped her elbow, pulling her to her feet. She thrashed, screaming and cursing as he led her toward the elevator, her elegant facade completely disintegrating into primitive terror. When the doors finally chimed shut, taking her screams away, the absolute silence of the high-rise returned. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. My ribs still ached, and my wrist would take months to fully heal, but the suffocating weight in my chest was finally gone. I touched the glass medallion, feeling the sharp, jagged edges of the jade sealed inside. We had survived the fall. And this time the wounds belonged entirely to the ones who caused them. Thank you for binging this journey of betrayal, truth, and absolute retribution. Did Alfred and Kara get what they deserved? Or should the hammer of justice have fallen even harder? Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe for the next addictive, high-stakes story.